No niin, odotetaan me vielä pari minuuttia. Vai? Okay, hello everybody. Ladies and gentlemen. So I'm here to talk about Symfony components with quotes and the Drupal 8. And my name is Pekkis. My real name is Mikko Forsström, but nobody calls me that, so you can call me Pekkis. And I work at Fractio, and we're not a Drupal company. We've done a couple of sites, but we mostly do custom web applications with PHP, and naturally we've used these Symfony components and the full stack quite a lot for a few years. And our general sponsor, Druid, is a much better choice for Drupal work. And I'm an open source guy. I contribute to a lot of libraries. I like small libraries. These are some of my, and I had this one monolithic great library or framework, the filelib, which was kind of like Drupal. And then I decided to cut it to pieces, and it formed the basis of many small libraries. So I really think that for reuse, these loosely coupled small libraries are the way to go, and which is the way to go in Drupal 8, of course, too. And I'm not a Drupal dude, so my perspective for this presentation is, of course, a little bit different. And I follow Drupal, but because of the Drupalisms, the functional or procedural code, it's not really been my cup of tea. But we share offices with the Druids, and I've worked in a company who specializes in Drupal for a year. So I've been quite close to Drupal. And with the Symfony components, I've worked I don't know how many years they've existed, but many years anyways. And content management, I really love it. I started my career in a custom CMS building company. It was built with Perl and Kylix, and I spent 2 or 3 weeks to refactor it with PHP, and it's still pretty much the same, the code base. They use it. I haven't worked there in 8 years, but they still use it, and I know all the exploits, and I go to the sites and test the exploits. They changed the code, and no, mostly they didn't. So I'm really proud that my CMS, one of them, I built 10. Here's one actually, built with Zen framework. I didn't remember the admin password, so I can't show the admin, but anyways, it was really small. I'm a firm believer in really simple stuff. I like the edit button, and then VisiBook editor opens, and I type and I press save, and for 90% I believe that's enough. And so Drupal apparently is going there because you have now the VisiBook in the core, and you just press the edit button. I installed Drupal 8, and I liked it because I just could edit the content, and yeah, it was fantastic. And I've coded maybe 10 content management systems, and so I really like. Some of them were actually pretty much like Drupal. In 2002, I had these modules you could install, and they did stuff. It wasn't as good, of course, But what of these Symfony components that I'm here to talk about? I like to think that Symfony component is just an euphemism for this larger thing, meaning these loosely related components that connect Drupal now with the wider PHP community and code reuse. And Twig, your fantastic new template engine, is it a Symfony component? Let's say it is. It's made by Fabienne, of course, but it's not really part of the Symfony framework, but it's a Symfony component in this usage of the word. So let's call it that. And all this new stuff is, of course, object-oriented. So for the old school Drupal guys, there might be a little learning curve. How many of you is oriented in the object-oriented Drupal 8 already? Yay, some of you. Good. But these are small small components that you can use independently, which is nice. And they're documented and they're tested. So it's fantastic. And I had this presentation last year, autumn, in the PHP user group. And it was about the general PHP scene and the development there in the last few years. And I think that these things saved us and are going to save us. I was really, really, really worried, and still in a way am, about the state of the PHP in general. But the first thing was that PHP 5.3 had these things called namespaces. And namespaces made it possible for us to organize our code better. No more like this long class names. And it's nice. And then GitHub and Bitbucket and cloud services like that made it easy for us to share the code. And someone built Composer and Packagist. More about them a little bit later. And Fabien, of course, released the components which we are talking about, and the Symfony 2 full stack framework utilizing these components. And Facebook, this is a little more recent, but Facebook's PHP runtime, I believe in it. It's the future. What's the state of Drupal and hip hop? Anybody know? Does it work? HHVM and Drupal. Anybody? But how far, do you know how far it is from working? Even a little bit.
I think it's very close. I think 6 months ago they said that like 99.8% of PHP scripts work on.
Great. But anyways, I don't think that the Symfony components are 100% yet, so it's getting there. But I believe that this is the future. All the hardcore PHP guys and girls, like Sarah Golemon, are behind the PHP runtime. The 10 runtime is awful, and the continuing bickering of those guys who are deciding what to do with PHP, it's stupid. They are pulling it in completely wrong direction and not listening to the user base of the userland. They're stupid. Rasmus and those guys, they have no idea. So this is why I believe personally that the Facebook created runtime is the future, and for all our sakes, if we are going to continue PHP, we should get behind it. And Hack, of course. Hack is a bonus. And this has gotten us to the point where our life is nice. I have a lot of code, so I'm not going to the presentation mode because I have to swap all the time. So Composer and Packagist. If I call it Composter, it's just because I started to call it Composter, and then I can't get it out of my head. It's in the console, it's Composter for me because I always type it wrong. So who doesn't know what Composer and Packagist are? Okay. So Composer is a package manager for PHP, and Packagist is its repository for packages. And these two together, they're like pair, but 1,000 times better. And they handle the dependencies of the projects. And they use semantic versioning, so it makes using the external dependencies a little bit easier and not so much pain. Of course, if you have like 1,000 dependencies, it's still hell, because you have to, when you update it, the dependencies, everything breaks. So, and it also handles autoloading, so you just include one file, and then all the classes are there for you to use, and no more require or anything like that. It's really fantastic. I have a presentation here, so everything you need is one file, the composer.json, and there are my requirements. I use some Symfony components for my Drupal. You'll see soon what Drupal is. And I want them stable and from the 2.4 branches. And yes, so Composter, Intel, no Intel for me. Intel. Yes, so of course it's cached, so it's fast, but and it resolves all the dependencies and the dependencies of the dependencies and their dependencies. So it knows that there are no version conflicts for me, for my libraries, and it tries to resolve. Sometimes it fails horribly, and then the screen is full of red, and then you spend 2 days resolving them yourselves. But mostly it works okay. So basically now I'm wired, and all I have to do in my code is require this autoload.php file, and yay, I'm good to go. We'll get to that soon. And do ask.
What's the role of packages?
Hmm?
The role of packages.
The packages is the repository for the packages. So I can go to the packagist and then I can search the packages, the metadata.
Place where the
Yeah.
composer gets them.
Yeah, Composter gets them from there. It, of course, for example, Zen framework, and it's another good example of a community that likes to invent the wheel again. So once they held a Composer repository of their own, and every time you used the Zen framework to packages, you had to add the extra repository. But I think that somebody, I have no idea whether it's Zen or some nice guy who has put them to the main repository, but now I don't have to add it. But you can use other repositories too, but then you have to put them to the composer.json. But it's possible.
Who is behind packages?
Once, when it was down a couple of months ago, somebody did a dig and it went to China. So the server was in China, but I have no idea who's behind it. But all the code, at least for the Composer, is of course free software. So this is replaceable. So here are some of my packages. They live in GitHub, and what I have to do in GitHub is to edit the composer.json to the format that this packages reads, and then it goes there and fetches that. And there's a hook in GitHub, and all the updates and such, as long as I use the semantic versioning, it just magically appears here. Every push, every new branch, everything comes here. So it's nice. It's really easy, actually.
Integrate GitHub which has code.
Yep.
And you can fork this stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
You can make your own package.
Yep. Yeah. The code always lives in GitHub, and the Composer gets the metadata from packages, and then it downloads the tips from GitHub. And half of the time these days, it seems that there's something wrong with GitHub. Somebody is attacking it. So that's the kind of low point, because it always gives 404 or 405 or 500 sometimes. But hey, it's still better than to manually edit your dependencies and take care of them. It's an infinite betterment in comparison to the old world, or PR. PR is kind of nice, but the packages are global. These are project specific, so there's no race conditions for versions or anything like that. So this is one thing that no matter what you do, what Drupal version you use, what you're going to do in the future. If you're going to do stuff in PHP, you have to know this stuff, and it's not that hard to know. So this is the basis for everything in the wider community, because all the reusable packages are here. More questions about this stuff. I think that I have many slides, and we have a little time, so we have to fly. What number? I can't see anything. Ah, here. So now, Drupal and the components. I use the quotes because it's just some components. These are the actual Symfony components, which are now shared between, for example, Drupal and Symfony 2 framework. Also, Laravel uses some of these, and many others. I use some of these in my project. So the first is, I'm not going to even read those because we are going through them one at a time. So, but these are the package names. They all are found in packages under the Symfony namespace. So you can go and search from there. And then there are these other components, and these are not part of Symfony, but these are Symfony components all the same. For example, Twig. I have this. Oh. But anyways, I lost my thought. Anyways. But yeah, I have no idea how you are going to use Composer in Drupal 8, because I downloaded Drupal 8 and read through the source code, and maybe it's just because it's not finished yet, but there was only, the main Composer JSON was this global Composer JSON, and it just put all the libraries under the core, and they were already downloaded and pushed into the repository. It's not very usual to do.
You are not supposed to use them for Drupal site. You are using them for developing core.
Ah, okay. But why are those packages like pushed to the Drupal repository? I had no idea, because the first thing that you do with any usual project is that when you get the code from GitHub, then you say Composer install, and the packages are downloaded. But in Drupal, they were like baked in. I have no idea about the motivations of the core guys, but that's the way it is. I think that somebody will envision a way to use Composer and download your own packages for your own sites. Maybe through Drush. I have no idea. Does anybody know?
There's an Angular module for
Yeah. But
of course, you can just use it like from the command line, like you did.
yeah, but if then where does your project's Composer JSON go? Yeah, but anyways, one thing to notice is that there's this magical log file. It's for stable releases. It logs the versions of the packages. So when you say Composer install, it first checks this log file and takes exactly the version that is here, because you don't want something to get updated without you knowing it. And when you say Composer update, then it updates all the packages with the rules that are in the JSON. So if you are in a 2.4 series of Symfony, then it may update from 2.4.1 to 2.4.2, but not to 2.5. So there shouldn't be any breaks. Of course, there always are. And then my only instruction is that you update once in a month instead of once in 2 years, because then it's 2 hours of work versus 2 weeks of work. So keep your packages up to date if just possible. But I read the Drupal 8 code base, and what you don't see, it can't hurt you. These things are pretty well hidden under the usual Drupalisms, and when you develop some simple site, I wouldn't know that any change has happened, because these things are in the bottom, and the Drupal just utilizes them. You don't necessarily even know that they're there. But I didn't have any clue of what Symfony 2 did when I first got it and began to develop it. And it didn't make me a better developer, because I didn't know. It just magic happens. And why does it happen? I firmly believe that you have to understand that from the bottom to achieve something real. And if you're going to develop modules or anything that goes deeper in the Drupal world, I really suggest that you read the documentation and experiment with these these components. And I personally find that there's a lot to learn from these, because they are coded pretty well, some of them at least. It's good code, and I've learned a lot just by reading it and trying to comprehend it in my feeble little mind. And I think myself that the best way to learn is to simplify our domain to the bare minimum and then code a solution of our own. Of course, reading the Drupal source is the ultimate thing, but if you start to experiment with these packages and using them independently and looking what they can do, then you should like grab them and do the stuff. And I devised this Drupal, which is my own Drupal killer. This was a logo from my Halloween horror presentation where was Drupal. And yeah, I wrote it wrong. It's Drupal or something. But anyways, mine is Drupal. And I built it with the components. And it's really nice. Let's go to the first stage of my code. Yeah. So this is where we start. We can think of this as the Drupal 7. It's an index PHP solution, and there is one variable, which is the greeting. Who are we trying to greet? And then there's HTML and some outputting of our variable. This is the bare minimum I could think of. So what it renders in the browser is this. I can tell who to greet, and it has a default, which is Tussiposki. Welcome to Drupal. Okay, so this is our Drupal. It does some magic, and then it outputs HTML. It couldn't be simpler. So, and the code, there is one file. I should add actually I just forgot this from my step. This is the magic of the Composer. Now everything that I have installed through Composer and packages is now available for my use. And when they update, the autoloader updates, and it does kind of all kinds of fancy performance optimizations like class maps and stuff like that. But I don't have to worry about it. I just have to tell it what to use, and it does its magic for me. Okay? So then, when I want to begin with some components, a good basis is the Symfony HTTP Foundation, and it is a HTTP abstracting library. And we are all in the business of converting HTTP requests to HTTP responses. That is what we do. Everything is about it. And that's why we should know our HTTP protocol. Who knows the protocol inside and out? Everything. Yeah, great. We should, because that's our job. We get a request and push back a response. And this abstracts everything from the protocol. It abstracts requests, responses, cookies, session, file uploads, everything, whole 9 yards, like I say. And after this, there is no more using those nice underscore magic super globals and their friends. And this is like the bestest library ever. It got like Fabian 6 years to get this right. So they say that it's actually the most bestest HTTP abstraction library in any language. They say that it handles 100% of everything. I have no idea whether this is true, but I say that Fabian, this is a good library. Fabian is proud, and he has good reason to be. I use this always. If I have to do anything with requests and responses, I use this, because this takes all the hard stuff, all the proxy servers and stupid things that you have to know. This takes them all away. Drupal had some extra additional super magic stuff it does, and they're still there. So they apparently don't trust that this does 100% because there was some weird things going on with the Drupal before they manipulate the super globals before they instantiate the request. Did someone have something to say? Okay, so anyways, if you do something with HTTP and PHP, use this library because it's super good. So if we take a look at Drupal, yes. Now you see that it's a little bit changed, and we just use the autoload. It's the same, which I added. And then we use the request and response. And I create my request from the globals, and then I get the greeting parameter, which I had in the query string. I get it from the query string, and it has a default value. So now I got rid of the if is set, then else stuff, because this is nicer. So now I have this kludge, which is OB start, and I get this, my template, to a variable with this OB get clean, and then I form a response with this body, and it has the 200 HTTP OK. And when I say prepare with request, it makes sure that the HTTP protocol is followed with the data from the request, and then it shuffles the response to match with the request. And then I say some magic cache settings. It's a private, so it may not go to the cache except on one's own machine, and it expires at my birthday in 1978. So basically it's never cached, and then I send it. So it's a small abstraction, but it has a lot of methods, and it knows a lot more from about HTTP than I do. So you should read all the methods and try to understand what you can do. But you can do pretty much everything. You cannot do, for example, your beloved varnish stuff with this. It comes later. It's not this library is concerned, but we'll get to that. But anything with basic HTTP you can do, and you should do. It's nice. And then there's the twig. My template was kind of vomit-inducing because it had the OB start. I don't like it that much. And whether you like templating engines, you can always say this is a usual common catchphrase that PHP is a template engine. And yes, it is. It's a template engine, but like the previous the keynote guy said, that when you have PHP as a templated engine, you can call all kinds of PHP methods, and you can push stuff to database, and you can do all evil stuff. And I've seen Drupal code that does these evil things from the templating. It's terrible. The layers are all mixed up. So Twig and all template engines, they make the template engine just the representation of the data. So there's no going back. It creates a nice layer, and it knows all kind of tricks, extending. You can have a base template which holds all the head and stuff like that. I'll show you in a moment. And Drupal seems not to use those. It has an own abstraction for all the head elements. I didn't understand. It had no point. We'll get to that later too. But anyways, it could and should use more of this Twigs feature, maybe in Drupal 9 or 8.1 or something like that. And stuff is always cached if you configure it to cached as pure PHP classes. So the template is only parsed once, or if you want, it can always check if the file is changed, and then it reparses it, and it's pretty fast as template engines go, and it's kind of nice as template engines go. I like Twig. I don't like template engines much because I'm a coder, and if I want to do evil things, I should be able to do it. But anyways, it's good for a template engine. So the next step, logical step in my Drupal is to install Twig. And with Twig, I have now this magical views directory which holds the Twig templates, and I have a cache dir which holds some cache templates. Those cache things should never, of course, go to the version control. They are just temporary files which change all the time. So, and my base script now instantiates Twig with some parameters, and it says that cache and debug. Debug means that when I change the template, reparse it, and it's fine. And then my body has changed. No more OB start. I say Twig render my template, and it renders it with the greeting, which is still the same. I get it from the, and everything else is the same actually. And I have this layout, which is really simple. It's mostly HTML, and then there's this Twig content, and it has blocks. And to these blocks, I can have default content and something. And with the child template, I now say that I extend layout, so I get all the common parts, and this specific for this controller, I have this greeting. And the greeting is there in a Twig variable. And it's in the content block, so it overrides anything that's in the mother template. It's really simple. This is, of course, basic stuff, and you have filters, and you have all kinds of things you can do with Twig, and you can extend it to eternity. And Drupal seems to do that. There's a lot of filters and stuff like that, Drupal-specific stuff that they have already done. So it seems that the integration is pretty nice. It could be better, but everything always could. And still, I think, until a demo effect comes, yes, now it's because I don't have Twig in my composer, because I just made it. So let's say composer update. And let's hope that everything goes as planned. The update is a little bit slower operation because it has to parse stuff, and PHP, it seems to parse a lot of stuff. I once had a dependency list this big, so it ran out of memory, and I had like 2 gigabytes available for the PHP command line, and it's still, hey, nice. As you can see in the time point of between yesterday and today, Symfony has released new versions, 2.4.5. So I didn't plan for this, but they did. And now it updated my 2.4.4, and there's Twig. So no need to change anything. I still use the same autoload, and there's my template. It's meant to look exactly the same, but now I've added already like 2 or 3 abstraction layers. And it seems that my code has actually gotten a lot more complicated, but hey, it's still nicer. So that's about Twig. I think you'll hear a lot more about Twig in Drupal's context, but there's much, much better guys to talk about that. Any questions about Twig or thoughts, experiences with Twig? Mm-hmm.
I understood that you can do some kind of complicated stuff like rendering a table
Mm-hmm.
from the variable.
Yeah.
So what's that stuff?
We'll get to that in the next phase, actually. So you'll see that. If I don't grab it, I think it's in my mind. It's like so obvious that I might forget it. But then, yeah, it comes in step 5 or 6, I think. But yeah, Twig has loops and filters and everything. We can look at them at that point. Yes. So now we get to some complicated stuff. Dependency injection. I'm not going to explain dependency injection as a pattern. It's too complicated. But anyways, in dependency injection in Drupal's and Symfony's context, it's about that you configure an object, which is the dependency injection container, to contain instructions to construct your objects and objects they depend on, and it makes them for you when you want. And yeah, it sounds really complicated, but actually it isn't. You just configure configuration. Welcome to the world of configuration. You'll learn to hate it. No more coding, just configuring some UML or JSON or anything. No, you can't code anymore because you just configure the framework and it codes for you. It's terrible. But after you have configured your configuration and warmed your cache warmers, then it may, at some point, actually construct an object for you, and it does it lazily. And that's the whole point of this, because you don't need the complex object. Okay, let's go to step 4. I don't remember the branch. Yeah, services. How much time? 20 minutes. Okay. 10. It may take a little longer, so prepare for that. Yeah, but it'll be there. Okay, so let's put speed to this. Did it check out? Yes. Okay, so now I have this very complicated object graph that I use to achieve actually this stuff. So I iterate through stuff which come from a service, and then I put it here. So now to your question, it just looks like this. There's a for. I iterate through things in stuff, and then I can use the key and the value, and this is how it goes. And if I would want to use the thing, get the thing like in uppercase, I would do something like that. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Yeah, it does. It had a filter, yep.
So are we getting rid of all this, for example, render data functions and stuff?
Yep.
So everything that is going away.
I think I have no such deep understanding of what Drupal 6 does, because I haven't used it, but yeah, or 7, yes, but the 8 should get rid of this stuff, of course, because now you have this, of course it may have helper functions and stuff like that, but they probably use Twig themselves, and you don't have to use them. You can just create table very easily, because you can. Yeah, you can extend Twig with functions, and the functions then map to PHP functions, and you can do all kinds of stuff. You should really read the Twig's documentation. It's really good. But anyways, now I have these magic values that they come from, like, where do they come from? Yeah, I have this greeter service, which is the new greeter, and it needs in its constructor a greeter needs me, and the greeter needs me object needs the greeter needer needs me object. So I have to make them in this order. This has no parameters. This one has the first one, and this is then uses the other, and it gets the stuff from the greeter. So now I have 3 objects that I have to by hand instantiate to get this, and it's, if the operations that these objects would do would be really take a long time. For example, they would get the stuff from across the wire, or do some magical constructor. It could be slow to instantiate all these objects. So then we need the dependency injection. Okay, let's go fast. Services after DI. So now I configure the configuration. Please do note that you usually don't configure the configuration by hand. You configure the configuration files, which are then parsed by the configurator, and then it configurates configuration for you. But this is the raw stuff. Usually you edit YML files or JSON files. It's much more boring. But anyways, there's my dependency injection container, the container builder. I say that I need a greeter there, which is of this class. And as a construction argument, it gets a reference to neither2. And this reference comes from the container builder. So here is neither2. And it needs neither1. And then there's neither1. And then when I need the object, I can ask it from the container, get me the greeter. And at that point, it goes through the configuration and constructs my objects for me, just at the moment when I need those. So it's faster, more complicated, but when you have a large number of different classes and objects, it's nice, and it's not that hellish to configure to the YML. And this is what it does. It constructs your object, and there's a lot more. There's like 250 classes in the dependency injection package. So it does aliases, it does all kinds of stuff. But the basic stuff which you need 90% of the time are really not that complex. And when you look at the Drupal, I promised you YML. So there is this core libraries YML, which holds something, and core services. This is the configuration for Drupal's dependency injection container. So this is what you have to get used to. You configure this stuff. The modules had this also. It's everywhere. It's everywhere in Symfony 2. It's everywhere in Drupal. I hate it with a burning passion, almost as much as CoffeeScript. To construct your objects lazily and manage their dependencies. It's done because constructing objects is expensive. It's the object-oriented stuff is much more hard on the machine. So when you have like 5,000 objects, you cannot instantiate them with every request. You just want to do the stuff you need to do. So this is why you do it, basically. And it's a beautiful pattern, but if you like to code, it's irritating. But you can live with it. You have to.
Doesn't that also abstract dependencies from your code, right?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, the dependency injection as a pattern has many attributes which academic guys can explain.
Yeah, but if you want to, for example, change the
Yeah.
or something like that, you can do it from the configuration instead of going through your own code.
Yeah, you don't have any hard-coded dependencies. If you change for example, if you have a queue and the queue backend changes from RabbitMQ to ActiveMQ or IronMQ, you just edit the configuration and it just works.
Also, you can get rid of global variables.
Yeah, Drupal 8 had some global variables still. I don't know why. Maybe they are just removing it. But yeah, no more globals, no more evil things. This adds complexity, but it then gives speed and all the advantages. It's enterprisey, but you'll get used to it because you have to. It's sad, but you have to.
It is so that the object is instantiated only once.
That's configurable. There are some objects you need like a new instance every time, but that's rare. Usually they are shared, and it's done only once. Yeah. But there are some exceptions, and that's the hard stuff in the DI container is to handle all the hard stuff. But by reading Drupal and maybe installing Symfony 2 or Silex and checking what they do with the dependency injection, then you get a better hang of it. It was really, really hard, I remember, for the last time, for the first time. But this is the last stuff. Let's go through this in like 5 minutes, because this is really, really complicated and stuff. But it's the HTTP kernel, and it's something you build your own Frankenstein monster with. And the Frankenstein can be Symfony 2 or Silex or Drupal. So this is a component that provides blah, blah, blah. It's a framework for frameworks, which you can use to build your own framework and bind all the stuff that we have done this far together, okay? So, and then it uses the event dispatcher. You are all familiar with hooks, so I don't have to explain events, because it's just an object-oriented version of your hooks. Something triggers an event, and the listeners listen, and you can subscribe, and then decoupled stuff happens. Plugins, modules, extensibility. The interesting thing is that the Drupal now has two parallel hook systems. I don't really understand why. The first thing I would have logically done with Drupal 8 was to remove the hooks and replace it with event dispatcher. But maybe there was some performance or some other reason. You have to ask those guys who did that question. But now all the HTTP events are listened through the Symfony stuff, and all the hooks are in the Drupal side, and they are as they were before. And I think that's stupid, because you have two systems that are much like the same, and no idea. And when you start to read the code, you begin to weep immediately, because it's so complicated. There's bundles and cache warmers and 1,000 different things, and master requests and sub requests, but then it's so brilliant when you begin to understand it that we still weep. And you have to remember, with great power comes great responsibility. Symfony 2 is so goddamn complex. It's a monster with the configuration and cache warming and cache cleaning and stuff like that. I like Silex more, and the micro frameworks that utilize this HTTP kernel. And the Drupal seems to suffer from the same syndrome as Symfony 2. It's a monster. If I were a new guy who didn't understand anything about Drupal or Symfony or PHP, then I would weep like crazy, because it's terrible. How would I even start? And you have a own presentation of the routing, but the routing just means that a request comes in, and then the request is processed to get something out of the request that you can use to produce something which is then returned as a response. This is the magic, that request is transformed to an array of variables, and then somebody catches that and does something and pushes out a response. Okay? Let's see really, really fast. I did this in an hour, and I still had like 2 minutes to spare. So now we have this monster Drupal, which only says that create my request, create Drupal framework which extends the HTTP kernel, and handle my request. And it returns me a response, and that's the same. And then it's returned. And all my logic is now in the Drupal framework. Of course, you wouldn't do this like hand-coded parameters in the constructor, but it's just to demonstrate that you would have config parsers and all kinds of stuff, but you just simply configure everything, then make some kind of controller. Usually in Drupal and Symfony 2, it's a class with a method, which is the controller, but the controller can be just an anonymous function, which I do here, and it uses the container and twig and does everything here, returns a response. There's a root, which just says that greetings something, default value. The controller is the greetings function. And then there's this magic HTTP kernel stuff that I just copy-pasted and don't understand anything about. So now I have a Drupal which now needs one last composer update. I don't have composer, of course. Now I called it composer so many times that now maybe I can. God damn. I have routing. What? Well, let's just assume. Now I know. This is an exception because my routing changed. I have now this greeting. Yay! So the router transfers this via magic, and then I have this same. Okay. Because the time is running out, let's go really fast. Now we can go to the. Let's not go there. Okay, so there's Guzzle. Guzzle is you don't make any HTTP requests with the Symfony HTTP foundation. It's just handling those. But Guzzle is the stuff you do the calls to remote services with. It's a good library, and it's in Drupal core, so you should read about Guzzle. And then there's these fake annotations from Doctrine. If you see something like this in your code, I am an annotation something, it's a fake annotation. It's stupid because now you can't strip comments from your code with optimizers because the comments have become part of your code. It's both terrible and clever, but it's the PHP ways. You have this PHP hammer which you hammer in the wrong sizes of holes. Okay, and then there was this mysterious case of missing ascetic. I have to ask, does anybody know what has happened with Drupal and ascetic? Because it has the dependency in the core, but I removed ascetic, like the code, and Drupal worked just fine. So I have to, and I searched for ascetic in the code and nothing was found. It's gone or not implemented. Is it coming? Does anybody know the fate of ascetic in Drupal 8? It's a shame that you don't know because ascetic is a good library for handling all your static assets. It optimizes your PNGs and JPGs and minifies your JavaScripts and that does all this stuff. Drupal had this poor man's replacement there, which optimized with quotes my JavaScript and CSS. I have no idea why they don't use ascetic because I would. You have to ask them. And beg them, please put ascetic in my Drupal 8.1. And they say that Drupal 8 is nearing beta, and I have to say really, because some things seemed backwards. For example, the Drupal bootstrapping controlled the HTTP kernel, and the HTTP kernel's first event cycle should trigger the Drupal bootstrap. I have no idea. Maybe it's something that they're still ironing out, and other things seemed half-assed. There was still this magic underscore server variables everywhere, and there were to-dos, todo replaced with Symfony request and response. And if you're nearing beta, these to-dos would be something you would like to do, okay? And some things just from the Symfony perspective seem plain stupid, but that's how it always has been. They seem stupid. It's the Drupalisms. And I think it's just a matter of opinion. So these are my thoughts for Drupal 8. You should split and composterify the whole goddamn core and components. There were a lot of packages. It's a monolithic monster. You should publish them, the small packages. If you want to reinvent the wheel, just publish them as standalone libraries and let other people use them and contribute them and not keep them in the monolithic Drupal core. And get rid of the reinvented wheels. There are fantastic packages for database abstraction, queuing. My own library is great for queuing. Transliteration, image toolkits, file management, caching. These are stuff that Drupal wants to build itself. Maybe there's a reason, but maybe those reasons should not be there. You should work around the constraints and reduce the number of your own code. So the Drupal core guys could concentrate on the Drupal functionality and not the stuff that you can get out of the box from Doctrine database abstraction or any libraries that you can find from packages. It's a waste of resources and time to build many of this stuff yourself. So that's something I would push if I had time and will and energy to contribute to Drupal. So that's about it. Not 10 minutes long. So questions, thoughts? This was a really fast introduction, but the code is in my GitHub, and this presentation will be shared. It's all free software and attribution licenses and stuff like that, so you may look at it. And there's this, if you Google build your own framework with Symfony 2 components, you get a fantastic series of 12 blogs by Fabien Potenciaire, and it's a must-read for all this stuff. He does it in much more detail than I did. It's a thing that I started with like 2 years ago.